Tonight we're going to be looking at a very important topic for everyone in Hawaii, a topic that people have been talking about for the last 4 months, and that is the coming effort of the U.S. Department of Defense to downsize the U.S. Army in Hawaii. And that is a shift in military priorities, looking at downsizing in Hawaii. Joining us tonight, a guest who has never yet come on First Friday. We're happy to welcome retired Colonel Al Frenzel to our show tonight.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thanks for coming, Al. This is a big issue and one that everyone in Hawaii, I think, is finding out about in the last 4 months. Many are expressing opinions, both pro and con. And we're happy to have you, but before we look at that, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you came to Hawaii and your background.
Well, sure. I'm Al Frenzel, and I was born and raised in Reno, Nevada. I went to University of Nevada, Reno. I graduated high school early and went to college early, but ran out of money. So the GI Bill was still in effect and an opportunity to come to Hawaii. And I took that and was here in Hawaii in 1975 and fell in love with the people, the culture, and the environment, and actually finished some of my schooling at the University of Hawaii and also Chaminade, and was able to go to Officer Candidate School and become a second lieutenant, and that was way back in '77. Since then I've acquired my finished my bachelor's degree and acquired a master's degree, both in business, and had a very successful career, and thankfully in the Army. 27 years active duty and 3 years civil service after that with Camp Smith, Hawaii. My final assignment, which helps me for today's issue, was assignment at the U.S. Army War College. It was a fallen assignment after being a student, and I was faculty on the War College staff, and in fact in a department that teaches in the area that we're talking tonight, and that is the force structure, how the joint forces are developed and strategized and manned and equipped, and how they're justified in strength. And I was actually the lesson author and the exercise director for a portion of our department's curriculum, where we would take the students through some budgetary exercises and strategy exercises where they would decide, based on some budgetary constraints, what type of forces, Army, Navy, Marine, Air Force, and I think I mentioned them all, for the perfect size to meet the threat while simultaneously meeting budgetary constraints. So it was a fun thinking experience, to think outside the box and form your own services.
And something directly related to what we're looking at now when we look at shifting military priorities, but this was in fact the focus of the June report that came out in 2014, just 4 months ago. Manu?
Yeah, the Department of Army announced, right, that they must cut active duty soldiers. It's a budget cut, and Hawaii bases actually were on the list. A few Hawaii bases, Schofield and Wheeler for 16,000 and Fort Chapter for 3,800. You were talking about, and we're going to talk about this just in general, and this is not a done deal. They're on a list. They're going to be looking at how they can, I guess, mitigate the result of doing these budget cuts in some way. But you were talking also, before we started the show, about the idea of Makua and Kolikoli Pass, and you were talking about some other areas. And I was just wondering, before we get into the detail of Schofield and Fort Chapter and Wheeler, how would that be negotiated?
Well, first of all, the Army identified as many as 130,000 to be cut in 19 states, and Hawaii is one of the 19 for 19,800. And they're only identifying the base's personnel at this point, because personnel is the big budget piece of the Army's infrastructure. So they have to cut those forces by 2019. So this is a decision that's been made very quickly. So they don't address base closure, they don't address transfer of actual facilities. They only are at the point of discussing personnel cuts. So if we can embrace the personnel cuts for Oahu, which is I propose, is then I extrapolate forward and I say, well, if 16,000 are cut from Schofield, that only leaves 2,800 on station, and they can be easily transferred and consolidated at Fort Shafter. And what that then brings to us is facilities in central Oahu that are no longer needed, so Schofield and Wheeler, and obviously the ancillary installations, Makua Valley and Dillingham Military Reservation. And of course, I'm also advocating that Kolikoli Pass and unrestricted access through the Ululele Naval Weapons Station or Naval Depot be provided to the people of Hawaii as well. So it's me in behalf of the Oahu Council for Army Downsizing that's specifically going for these installations. It's something that would happen after the cuts are announced, that a more formal process of base realignment and closure would occur. And then the obvious identification for the BRAC team would be to go for the empty facilities, which would be Schofield and Wheeler.
Sure.
So that's
well, you know, and we mentioned the Oahu Council for Army Downsizing, and I'm just wondering, you know, is this like an Army-sanctioned council? Who are your members? Could you explain a little bit about that council?
This is a total non-profit, non-governmental organization, and it is. When I received an email on the Army Downsizing in early July, I unfortunately didn't open it up in June when it came in, because I didn't understand the title, Supplemental Programmatic Environmental Assessment for Army 2020 Force Structuring didn't mean anything to me, and I almost deleted that email. But when I finally opened it up and I said, oh my God, you know, and let me back up, is there were cuts announced over a year ago by the United States Army Pacific that 8,000 would be cut from, potentially cut from Oahu. And they had a big meeting at Fort Shafter, invited all the community members up there. And at the time I said, oh, well, they finally recognized that their paperweight, the Stryker Brigade up at Schofield, is no longer needed. But when this email came in, and it shows the figures of 19,800 identified, well, that's a total game changer. Because when you go to a figure of that high, we're now talking about bases and facilities no longer needed. 8,000 leaves a residual amount of forces on Oahu that nothing would be transferred to the state of Hawaii. But when you go to the number that's on the table now, and it's a real possibility, because the other competing states for these under 30,000, these are states with high political clout and also very high strategic value. There's bases with forces with worldwide strategic missions that cannot be cut. So the likelihood of Oahu forces to be cut is extremely high. And so because of that, I said, what is, you know, in taking experience that I have from the Army War College, I said, I am probably the only one around that can take this issue on and advocate for the goodness of consolidating at Fort Shafter and downsizing at Schofield and Wheeler. And now I can't do this on my own, so what I need is a council of like-minded organizations that I want to join and actually be the members of the council. I don't want to be a council member. I don't want to be the voice of this issue. I want to be the advisor, the facilitator. You know, we need a lot of advisors for this council. We need economic advisor. I'm the military advisor. We need cultural advisors. So I'm just one of many of this unsanctioned Army Council, non-profit, non-governmental organization.
You know, Al, when you were talking earlier, you said right now at this stage, we're looking at base personnel, military personnel. We're not looking at base closure. But what you're saying now is that when you look at 19,800 personnel being downsized, it will likely be followed by some kind of base closure or radical cutback. Is there any indication, we're talking about Schofield, Wheeler, and things like this, is this something that you've gleaned from the report? Is this something that you're giving us your own expertise on? I'm just wondering where it's going to come from, because we have military bases on many of the islands.
Well, it's mainly an extrapolation. It's if A, then must come B.
Yes.
But base realignment and closure procedures, BRAC, is an extremely volatile issue with the Congress. There's a lot of emotion tied to any BRAC hearings, and people start arguing, and what happens is usually BRAC procedures don't go far or go very slowly and take forever. So in order to avoid the BRAC issue right now, the Army just wants to focus on the personnel piece. The personnel piece reduces their overhead for their biggest budgetary item, which is personnel. But obviously they know, and the DOD knows, who directed them to do this, that the next course of events is, first of all, equipment downsizing, reduced equipment procurement, and reduced basing. And these bases have to be closed because you don't leave open bases open because they're expensive to maintain.
Yeah, it would be the efficient thing to do.
Right.
You know? And you know, you were commenting about how you didn't want to do this, and you want a lot of people on the council who are well versed in different areas. And you know, Mililani and I were talking about it, and we totally disagree with you. We think that if she and I were to take this topic on, they say, oh, that's just those activists. Look at them, they don't like the military. But you know, the fact that you are here and that you're a retired colonel in the Army, that you're a white male, and that you're leading this brings some credibility to it. And I think we appreciate it because we are very interested in, number one, downsizing the military impact here. I think it would be a fabulous opportunity, both from an economic perspective, so many different areas. I think it would be very good for the island of Oahu. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but before we get started, I think it's fair to ask, what is motivating you to do this? Well,
and you might have misunderstood me. I don't mind doing this. I just think the council will be more successful if I'm not running things, you know, because of of exactly what you just explained. But it's a no-brainer issue for me because, first of all, I get to take advantage of my Mana'o experience on this issue. And it's a common sense, you know, it's so easy to understand, and it's a common sense issue. It saves us the U.S. taxpayers money, it saves the state money, it opens up resources that are available to many needy people, organizations, and businesses in the state of Hawaii. When I analyze the whole issue, I can't find anything negative about it. We'll talk about some economic impacts, but you know, that is it. And in fact, when the Army released its environmental assessment, it released a FONSI, finding a no significant impact on any of the 19 states and installations involved. The only thing they found across the board in all 19 states was there was a negative social economic impact on all those equally. So there's an impact on us, it's an impact on Texas, California, New York, etc. So, but we can overcome that, and we'll talk about that more as we get into that. But the economic piece is the cost of the downsizing is infinitesimal in degree to the billions and billions of dollars of advantages that we would receive from receiving those installations.
You know, I think let's take a look at what some of those advantages are. And when I was doing the research to prepare for the show, of course we were looking at different perspectives in the community. There have been businesses expressing concern out in the Wahiawa area. There's been some concern expressed by the Chamber of Commerce. But there has also been increasing discussion about the benefits of this. And some of them are real tangible benefits. And I think, we should take a look at it. I myself, when I read the report, realized that of the 100 to 130,000 personnel that will be downsized nationally, close to 20,000 will be coming from our state. That's a lot of housing in a state that has a critical shortage of affordable housing. And how did we get into the critical shortage? We got there because the U.S. military was giving an average of $3,200 per month as a living supplement. When this happened in Hawaii, all the rental landlords increased the rent because they wanted to get more money, and it was the military personnel that had the capital that got into the affordable housing. when you think about these folks leaving Hawaii now, that will free up significant amount of housing. And just for those who maybe didn't see the projects, the housing projects right off the freeway, where it turns and goes into the airport, that's a very good example. Recently built military housing, they're great houses, they're all duplexes, quadruplexes, they have solar panels, they were built green. You know, this is the kind of affordable housing we really need in our state. When military evacuates, when military leaves, they leave their housing here. How does it get turned back? And who does it go to? Is it the state? Is it the county? Is there an opportunity for Hawaiian homelands?
Right. Under the BRAC procedures that I understand, it goes first to the state of Hawaii, and then from there. There's other competing arguments on that, but you know, procedures in the continental United States have always gone to the state. But when you mention housing, there's 38,000 family members living in either family housing or single soldier quarters on Schofield and Wheeler, and most of the all the families are in single family houses. There's very few up in central Oahu that are duplexes, and beautiful homes, most of which have been built in the last 15 years. I mean, an 80-acre golf course was transformed in the late 90s and 2000s into brand new housing, and my valuation of that alone is about $2 billion just worth in family housing, but that's only one of 100 different type of assets up there that can be quantified. Right.
And you know, I agree with Mili. You know, that I think that removing these people from our population will help in that you look at that policy and it's kind of inflationary at best. You know, the fact that our military is allowed to be given this subsidy for housing, and we know about that, and it's hurting the locals. And I think I'm not sure exactly, I wish I'd looked it up, but I thought that the projection for new housing was going to be about 40-something thousand necessary in the next year or so. And you're talking about 38,000 family member units. I mean, this could be a win-win.
38,000 family members in various units of about 7,000 units.
Still going to make a difference.
It's huge. It's huge. It's huge for the homeless population that could be relocated and put through training and work programs.
Yes.
But you know, just a wonderful opportunity.
You know, when the Native Hawaiian Land Recovery Act went through, which was the bill that was supposed to be resolving all of the past problems with lands that had been withdrawn from Hawaiian homelands, there was a general settlement. Most of it was worked out, but there was still an amount of acreage of land that was owed back to the department, and it didn't come back for the very reason they couldn't find a parcel that was exactly that size of acreage. But this might create an opportunity to resolve problems like that. And also, I think we all know that horrible Kaka'ako fiasco in the last legislative session. Somehow the settlement that went through was $100 million short of land value. Perhaps this is a good opportunity for us to look at how some of these properties could be transferred to Office of Hawaiian Affairs to take care of the $100 million debt. State doesn't have the money, they're looking to get land, and this might be an opportunity. You know, one of the things, Al, when we were looking at preparing for the show was we were seeing articles coming, say, from the chamber talking about what we were going to lose, but they didn't talk about some of the things that our state carries and pays for, the military, that military folks don't pay for. And one of the issues I saw was the issue of the cost that the DOE and the state taxpayer puts out to educate the children that are military dependents, and it's significant.
And actually, the federal government will brag about how they contribute to the impact aid to the Hawaii Department of Education. They will say, oh, we give so much money per year per student. But in actuality, and the numbers vary of who you talk to, but the deficit per student is about $5,500 per year that we absorbed in Hawaii to pay for the Department of Defense's students to go to school here. So that's an equivalent of about $125 million that Department of Education has to pay. you know, I don't want to be too quoted on those money because, you know, there's a question of whether the reimbursement is $5,500 as low as the other estimate I have is $1,500 from someone who terms himself as an expert in the field. But regardless of which two of those figures you take, it costs $12,000 to pay for the students. So we take a big hit just in the education alone. So
yes, I think the general figure, you're giving us a low figure here at 125 million,
right,
which is what the state taxpayer is paying
per
to
year.
educate the children per year. 125 is the
Right,
figure you're giving. The other figure, though, that I found was 132 million, 7 million more,
right,
but it's still millions of dollars. And this is what we've been paying every year, every year for years to educate the OE children. Another issue that has come up in this debate is the fact that the state does not collect taxes from those folks that are shopping on military bases at commissaries or filling up their gas on the base. See, all of those purchases are exempt from state taxes.
Well, there's three taxes they don't pay, and that is well, you're mentioning the general excise tax,
yes,
which a majority, and the Chamber of Commerce doesn't realize or won't admit that a majority of the Army purchases are done on base, whether it's a PX or the commissary. The Army's environmental assessment only alleges that 16% of the Army payroll dollars get out to the economy and to the community. So, and that means 84% is not getting collected through GET. But then there's also the taxes of property taxes.
Yes.
All those homes, all those facilities, no property tax being paid, no income being taken in. Oh, by the way, no rent being paid by the U.S. government for the opportunity to be there. And then thirdly is the state income taxes. Yes. So we have 48,000 some odd is the number of people identified in the Army's environmental assessment that will be impacted and leave Hawaii from this possibility. And they receive state and government state government services and county services, but yet they're not paying for that. Let's talk about their registration of their vehicles alone. They pay a much reduced, almost an administrative fee versus what we pay for our automobiles. So the demand, the pressure on state and city and county facilities, the demand on our recreational areas, the demand on our highways is huge. It's all the intrinsic or unrealized costs that the Chamber of Commerce conveniently ignores.
You know, one of the things that we were talking about outside was the general sentiment that Hawaiians have expressed for a long time. And we looked at the historical fact that we have been militarized ever since the time of the overthrow. But Hawaii is an interesting state in that from the time of statehood, there were lands that were state lands, identified clearly as state lands, but they have never been under the state control. They've always been under military control. So when we look at some of these parcels, this will really be the first time that the state and the counties will have ever been able to access this. So I look at these things as being opportunities to bring in more taxes. Housing transfer to the state, whether it goes to DHHL or not, is going to be housing that's going to be relieving our housing shortage. But to the extent that it is ceded lands, they will then have to pay the property taxes, and that's going to bring in revenue that state has never really seen before. It's not even contemplated in our current tax report for our department.
And you mentioned one more thing too before the meeting, and that was that all those people that occupy and become residents up there and permanent residents and live there, they're going to be consumers. And where are they going to purchase their items? There's not going to be a commissary or PX. They're going to purchase their items locally from Wahiwa and Mililani and other places in the local area. And all these local communities are fearful of, oh my God, what are we going to do when the Army leaves? They actually, as in the case of continental United States scenarios, will benefit. You know, like in the scenario of Fort Ord, California, where they downsized, the community was in fear. They fought it to the last degree until it was forced down their throats. And then, lo and behold, they blossomed into in a community that's no longer dependent on a transient clients.
Right.
And now they're totally immersed in other commerce fields. The hospitality industry has grown. And one of the reasons why it's grown is because of affordable housing. People could actually own a home and live in the area and not have to commute 30 to 60 minutes to support the hospitality industry.
Right, you know, I have to agree with that. When I'm listing all of the benefits and I'm thinking about these businesses, and I feel for the businesses, but the businesses are being short-sighted if they're not thinking about how they could grow the community with a group of people that are actually going to be committed to living there and staying there and making the community more vital versus a community where they're depending on this group of military who get deployed and they're gone, and then what happens to the business? So, you know, there's no guarantee that your business is always going to be around and be given clients and customers. But when you look at this, I mean, we could open up these lands, these areas to local people to come in, to live there, to make a sustainable community. And this whole list, I mean, no GE taxes collected from military. We don't get property taxes from them. The rent, you know, there's no rent even of the land they're using to our government. There's no state taxes, registration fees for cars. We pay the military education, you know, an amount of that. All of the stress on our highways, our water supply, everything. Subsidy,
they draw water from the aquifer. They don't pay for it, and so in essence, that's a really high cost if we're losing water from the aquifer.
They drive thousands of cars on the roads, and they don't pay for that either because the money comes from property taxes.
Now, I do have to be upfront here and say that, you know, as Kalani Awesome has stated, has termed me. He calls me the lesser of two evils because I'm not anti-military. And to be clear with the audience on that. You know, I'm for a strong military. I believe the Marines and the Navy and the Air Force on Oahu are actually strategic, but the Army is not. And, you know, my training experience and, you know, analysis of this is we have an isolated force with no strategic airlift, no strategic sea lift. They can't deploy anywhere. They can't even train here. So to me, it may appear like I'm anti-Army, but no, I'm just saying this is right for the Army and it's right for Oahu. The Army needs to centralize, in regards to Hawaii, they need to centralize their operations on the continental United States and can actually deploy there because that's where their strategic lift assets are to anywhere quicker in the Pacific than they can from here.
Well, you know, what you're saying is making a lot of sense, but I think what you're finding out now is how brainwashed our community is. When it comes to military in Hawaii. Oh no, we can't have any downsizing of military. Oh no, they drive our economy, etc., etc. Now, you know, in your personal opinions on, you know, the Marines and the other areas of the military service, there are your personal opinions, and of course we would never not allow that. So we're very happy with that, but of course I'm looking at the entire military leaving and deoccupying the
well, as long as I'm the lesser of two evils, take advantage of the peace I can offer you.
Yes,
well,
yes,
you know, I think,
we will.
But I think it's a good point to make. We're not talking about all the military forces and all branches cutting back. We really are just focusing on the Army when we look at this report and the 19,800. Also,
and it's a start.
Yeah.
And I've been trying to convince, both directly and indirectly, we've met with two of our congressmen's offices already, but I'm trying to convince them two things. One is they don't have the political clout to stop this even if they want to. They don't have the NOA clout. So when these decisions are actually made at Congress, not by the Army, not by Defense, but by Congress, it's going to be who has the most clout, who has the strongest constituents, and that's going to decide where these forces are based. But also, so if they recognize that up front, then they can look at it from the perspective I have, which is embrace this opportunity and approach the Congress and approach President Obama and say, look, we're not going to fight this, we're not going to delay it and cost you all kinds of expenses. Oh, by the way, it's cheaper for the Department of Defense to operate if it doesn't have to put forces on Oahu. We want to have, as a result of our cooperation, a financial assistance transition package And I'm proposing for $5 to $10 billion that comes into the community to assist us with this transition, help the communities like Wahiawa.
Right.
I think, personally, we gain about $100 billion worth of assets alone from the idea of receiving those bases back.
Absolutely.
But our cooperation and the savings that the Defense Department will have long term, not having to have an isolated force here that they can't use, that's worth $10 billion to me. So let us have that for the transition period.
You know, one of the things I think that you know, we need to also take a look at is that for our state to grow, we need things, access to land, addressing our economic needs, affordable housing. But one of the big issues, I think, that will be impacted by this is energy. There's a huge population on Oahu, the vast majority of the people in the state. And there has not been the ability, primarily because of the HECO monopoly, but there hasn't really been the ability to provide enough energy to accommodate community growth. And in large part, there's been a huge consumption of energy by the military, and of course, they've always had a discount price.
Right.
So I see that there may just be other benefits in terms of consumption of resources, energy resources, water. Definitely, military consumes huge amount of water. So the departure of the military may provide us with more energy and more natural resources. The other thing I have to agree with, when we look at just the affordable housing crisis, and it is a crisis in our state, when those folks leave from communities such as Wahiawa, other families that are in critical need of housing are going to move in. And those families are going to need groceries. They're going to go shopping and they won't be at the commissary. Mm-hmm. They're going to need gas in their car and they won't be able to go on base to fill up. So I think that
might actually
there's
be a boom.
A period.
Right.
Yeah, maybe this transition, but I think that just because of the crisis for housing, we're not going to have those houses sit empty for very long. We're going to have families in there, right. They're going to be paying taxes, and they're going to be shopping. So I question whether or not the doomsday scenario is one that is really a realistic one for us. And when you talk about the examples up on the continent, where there was a great deal of fear, but what really turned out was it jump-started the economy in other ways and provided opportunities to the non-military population.
Right, and I'd ask the Chamber of Commerce to look at that, have their eyes open, and I think they'd come out with a different story.
Right. Well, you know, you talked about doing this well and having the congressional delegation go and advocate on behalf of, let's plan this, let's organize it, let's get some money behind it so that that transition occurs. Everyone always comes up with, well, what happened, you know, when we're looking over at, what was that, Barber's Point.
Right.
And do you have any information about Barber's Point? Because Barber's Point seemed to kind of, it was sort of a big deal, right. And everyone was scared, and then what happened?
Well, there's two things on Barber's Point. First of all, the BRAC procedure on that drug out so long that the Navy knew for over 15 years it was going to lose it. So they put no money in the infrastructure, they put no money in repairs. So what the facilities we wound up acquiring weren't the greatest in the first place. But secondly, most importantly, the state of Hawaii just messed up that whole transition. First of all, they didn't establish a committee with political leaders and community leaders to require certain things from the Department of Defense before they accepted it, and they didn't set the standard. And then they turned it over to HCDA and the Hunt Corporation to manage, and totally turned their back on it. And so there are some good things being managed out of the Barbers Point area, but it wasn't as good a transition as could be. And I hope it isn't you. And it is the number one reason why people don't are not for the idea is they don't want to see the beautiful facilities of Schofield Barracks and Wheeler Army Airfield ruined by the state. And what I promise them, that's not going to happen. We're going to have the brightest political leaders in charge of these committees and community oversight and participation. And what we want to do in the next phase, like was done in Europe when we turned over those bases, is there's a certain standard, even above BRAC procedures. You don't turn this over just and turn your back.
Walk away.
Yeah.
Right, right.
So you feel there really is an obligation, responsibility on the part of the state. Get organized, get in there, start negotiating for how this is going to unfold,
right,
and to ensure. And you were saying that you would look for $5 to $10 billion for transition.
Yeah, but that would be transition just for the state of Hawaii's purposes to manage with whatever they see fit. The BRAC procedures, under federal procedures, they're going to pay all these costs to do a turnover. That's above and beyond this package I'm asking for. So it's this commission that I recommend for the state of Hawaii to manage the transition. They need to have a high standard, because they're not paying the bill. You know, the federal government has to return it to the standard we expect and we demand. And you know what? If we accept it undone or half done, we have to pay the difference out of our own pocket. So let's get it done right by the federal government.
And that's a really good point, because unfortunately, most times than not, when the military leaves a site, there's things that need to be cleaned up, and we're talking about
in Hawaii,
toxins.
maybe, but in like Fort Ord, for instance, for example, they actually live fire on the beaches, on the Monterey beaches, and they brought in machines, high-tech machines, huge machines that processed all of the soil, took out unexploded ordnance, exploding ordnance.
Yeah, we need that.
And they returned sterile, clean land back that are now beaches are used by the people, trails, biking trails, hiking trails, and you know, this is beautiful prime real estate that is now used by all the people without any fences, without any danger signs, total 100% remediation.
You know, twice on the show now you've talked about the fact that we don't really have the political clout in the Congress. And soon after Dan Inouye died, the discussion began that there were going to be ramifications. One was going to be that there was not going to be the budget, federal budget coming down. The other had to do with whether or not the military, all of them here in Hawaii, would be getting their budget. How much stability would we have? But the truth is that we don't have the clout anymore in the Congress. When you went to see Mr. Schatz and Mazie Hirono, what kind of a sense did you get from them? You know, are they aware of the issue? Were they supportive of this idea of working with the state, getting prepared for this?
Schatz's office was very akamai about this issue, and they had talked to Waihua, and they also were accepted to our idea and understood the goodness of it. Mazie's not so much, but I do want to, you know, make the point of what I would hate to see. This is the worst case scenario, is that these junior freshman senators and congressmen, I hope they don't go to Congress and think that they're going to do us any favors by making some deal where they save only $10,000 to be cut. So I'm trying to tell them both directly and indirectly, don't come back to Hawaii and say, hey, pat us on the back, they're only going to cut $10,000 now. Okay, well what that means, and it ends the game changer I discussed earlier, is if there's any quantity like that of Army soldiers left remaining on Oahu, then no bases get transferred over. It's a status quo, just less Army personnel here. So no recovery of Schofield or Wheeler. You know, we'll have to continue the fight at Makua, and Dillingham won't turn over as well. So all the cuts, we get those bases back. Any proportional cut is a loss, and I hope they don't come back and tell me they won, because it'll be an unforgivable loss.
So the idea is like we'd still have all of the bases still in Army hands and skeleton crews in each one.
And unfortunately, it's to the Army's advantage to do that, because they save money on base cleanup. So they are going to have to balance the expenses to keep those bases operational, and they still have to maintain those facilities. So I don't think they're going to make that short-sighted decision, but we don't want to give them that opportunity. We want all those cuts.
No, I totally agree. The thing is that especially with our government here in Hawaii State, especially, we have a lot of short-sightedness.
Right.
So the idea of moving now, it's really not an anticipation. The report came out 4 months ago. We need to move now. We've talked a little bit about your visits with Chet and Maisie. What about Gabbard, Mark Takai, and Charles Dejoux?
Well, we're on the request list to meet with Tulsi Gabbard, but my concerns with Tulsi and Takai and Dejoux is they're lieutenant colonels in the Army Reserve, and they have a parochial view, I'm afraid of their loyalty and support to the military, but they haven't been at the strategic level. See, at the Army War College, we're at the strategic level of how the Defense Department does things and how defense strategy and political strategy is formed. You know, the military is just one means of political power. And I don't think they probably envision the greater good to the U.S. taxpayer and in fact their own services they are part of. The Army doesn't want, if the Army was given a choice, it doesn't want to be here. It's expensive, and they can't deploy from here. And if they had their choices, that they would be on the continental United States.
I think you make a really good point, and the point is that they're going to have to separate that from themselves, meaning they're not here and they weren't voted in because of their military expertise and because they were going to be advocating for the military. They were voted in by a constituency who wants them to do what's best for the state of Hawaii. So if this type of what you're suggesting, military downsizing, and what we're seeing, it's sort of developing to be something that would be very favorable to us, they should actually be voting in that regard, not because they have
and if they look from a military experience, from a strategic level, what's best for the Department of Defense, they would make the right decision and not locate forces in the most expensive part of the world in a place where you can't deploy from.
I wanted to, since we're getting to the end of our show, I wanted to talk about the petition. You have a petition, it's posted online. Tell us what the petition is about, why you put it up, where it will go, and how people can sign it. Right.
Well, the petition addresses this issue, and it's the advocation of embracing the downsizing in the quantities recommended by the U.S. Army. And it's targeted to all of the congressional representatives, both in office and as candidates, as well as the mayor and the governor. And what people can do is review that and review the issues around that at www.oc4ad.com. All the information we're talking about now and much more is at that site, as well as up in the top is a green little mark that says petition. But that's where the viewers can communicate directly, because each time that petition is signed, an email goes right to those targets, the congressional members and the governor and candidates and the mayor, and they get targeted with what their constituents believe.
I just wanted to repeat that. The site for the petition is www.oc as in cat, 4, ad as in dog.com. Take a look at it. I'm going to definitely go and take a look at it myself. It sounds like something that, I want to sign. This is, I think, a step in the right direction. But, I think you're right. We've got to get on this. We've got to make sure that we've got someone at the table negotiating for us so that we have a good transition.
This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. This is not going to cross our paths again.
I really think so.
I believe Hawaii as a state needs to start looking at actually getting off of that drug, the military drug. We need to start thinking about different ways of sustainability and thrivability, right?
Yes.
In other ways, other venues that don't rely on a war, that don't rely on, populations that deploy, etc. We really need to take those bold steps, and I think this is a great opportunity.
I'm glad you had me on tonight's show.
Well, I think we'll have to follow it in coming months. Until next show, remember you heard it first on the first Friday show. Aloha.
Aloha.
Aloha.